But this just coming in, the aftershock from the massive Gulf oil leak has now reached the halls of Congress, and the Obama administration is now confirming that the White House will, in fact, establish a presidential commission to investigate the Gulf oil spill, and that the president will use an executive order to establish the commission. All this coming as the official who oversees offshore drilling activities is taking what an administration source is calling, quote, accelerated retirement. The stepped-up departure comes after President Obama's pledge to end what he calls that cozy relationship between the government's Minerals Management Service and the oil industry. Meantime, the oil giant BP is trying everything it can to try to stem that leak, which is rapidly fouling the Gulf of Mexico and threatening to spread damage far beyond. Brian Todd is joining us now. Brian, after several failures, there's a little bit of success.
At least a little bit of success. Wolf, BP officials tell us that insertion tube that they've been using now for more than a day and a half is working, making what they call a big difference. They say this tube, just a few inches wide with a wider gasket that plugs the opening, is now siphoning off about 1/5 of the outflow. That's about 1,000 barrels a day out of the main leak at the riser and into tankers waiting up at the surface. Now, they have had setbacks. The line coming from that tube to these ships was actually caught up with one of those remotely operated subs right after they put the tube in, and that caused the tube to become dislodged early on, but they fixed that quickly. A BP official told me they hope to increase the amount of oil moving through that tube and up into the tankers within the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, we also have some new pictures to show you. That tube is also bringing to the surface a lot of natural gas. That is being burned at the surface in a process called flaring. These are new pictures put out by the Joint Command there to show us how that process is working. You see it kind of being burned off right there at the surface. Then, and that's kind of a look at the operation there, Wolf.
Brian, when are they going to try to permanently seal that well, what they're calling that, quote, top kill option?
Well, that's what I was told today was that option will be tried within a week. Now, that's that heavy drilling mud that'll be injected through the blowout preventer, this thing right here, down into the well, and followed by cement that will be injected down into the well. Now, either at the same time or possibly after that, they will try what they call that junk shot, the injecting of parts of tires and golf balls again into the blowout preventer, into that same part of the well to try to cap it, Wolf.
What about the so-called relief wells?
Well, they had already started drilling one of those relief wells. They just, within the past day, started drilling a second one. This is the most reliable option for shutting off the flow of oil, but the problem is it just takes too long. Each one of those takes at least 2 months to get in place, so you're looking at probably, into July before we have one of those in place.
Brian, what can you tell us about this underwater plume that has been discovered, because it has a lot of folks, environmentalists especially, very worried?
That's right, and now some serious pushback from NOAA and BP, but here's what we know. A group of researchers have been measuring this, and they have just returned with the results. They say they've found something below the surface which could be a massive plume of oil, or possibly more than one plume. Now, one of the researchers told me that it's located just southwest of the actual leak site. It measures between 15 and 20 miles long and 4 to 5 miles wide. You can see this animation we just created. The researcher says the top of it is about 2,000 feet below the surface, and it extends down about 4,000 feet, which is near the bottom and near where the leak is occurring. Now the pushback. A BP official told me BP is skeptical that this is oil. If it was oil, he says, it would have floated to the surface and not just be hanging there underwater. Now, a NOAA official says these are so-called hydrocarbons in the water column, but he says we cannot call this oil yet. NOAA says the data has not been analyzed, but again, there is some kind of a massive plume there underwater. It could be some hydrocarbons, could be possibly a combination of dispersants and some of those crystals that formed when they tried to put that other, that dome into the water, Wolf. They just have to analyze this a little bit more.
Let's hope they find out soon, Brian. Thank you. The head of the agency that oversees the oil industry is expected to testify now at a House committee hearing later this week. The Minerals Management Service has long been criticized for being way too cozy with oil companies. At a Homeland Security Committee hearing today, some senators said they were disappointed that no one from MMS was on hand to answer questions. Even as the oil spill wreaks havoc in the Gulf of Mexico, there are growing concerns that a major ocean current could carry the polluting crude through the Florida Keys and up the east coast of the United States. Our meteorologist Chad Myers shows us how that could happen.
Wolf, I know we've all heard of the Gulf Stream, that warm water that runs up the Florida East Coast and then on up to the East Coast of the U.S. But where does that Gulf Stream come from? You say, well, the Florida Keys. Yes, it does, but before that, where does it come from? It, in fact, starts in the Caribbean, south of Cuba, on up past Cancun, and then into the Gulf of Mexico. And why do we care? Because right here is the oil spill. And if the oil spill, as it's been just floating around, gets down into this loop current, which we expect, it will eventually take oil all the way through and into the Florida Keys, especially oceanside, and then on up the East Coast in that Gulf current, all the way up into the Gulf Stream. So months from now, and we're talking a long time, but months from now, oil from this spill could end up on East Coast beaches. Wolf?
All right, Chad, thank you. I hope it doesn't. There's an urgent effort underway right now to save wildlife harmed by this oil spill at the Fort Jackson Rehabilitation Center in Louisiana. Rescue specialists first try to stabilize oil-covered birds with fluids and nutrients. Then the cleanup starts. It can take several people 45 minutes or more to clean one bird, and that may require 300 gallons of water. Pelicans, gulls, and other birds have been brought to the facility. The odds aren't good. As of Friday, out of 21 birds, only a handful have survived.